Good morning, everyone. I think we're going to get started in just a minute. Thanks so much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Karen Powell, Deputy Assistant Superintendent for Early Childhood Strategy here at the Louisiana Department of Education, and it is so lovely to see your names and some of your faces popping up in the Zoom today. Thank you so much for joining us today. It feels like it has been some time since we gathered together for a collaborative, but I know that we have been very, very busy throughout the state in all of our networks since Summit and over the summer and in the beginning of this fall. But so happy to be together with you today and really hoping that the next time we have a collaborative, we can actually see you in person. So we are going to spend some time today talking about data-driven decision-making strategies because, of course, that is becoming more and more important for all of us as we implement more and more interventions to really know what's working and what's making a difference and really utilize our resources as effectively as possible. And then in the second half of our collaborative today, we are so excited to be unveiling for you our Believe application. For those of you who followed along with our ARPA plan for our American Rescue Plan Act stimulus dollars, we have 4 priority areas, some of, none of which will be unfamiliar to you, which are all continuing, but they really center around stabilization, expanding supply and access, continuing to improve quality, and continuing to expand family engagement. And so we look forward to showing you all the different funding opportunities you can apply for in those 4 areas a little bit later this morning. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Cannot wait to hear a great discussion today. And with that, I'll let the rest of the team take it away.
All righty, I think it's me next. So if you can go to the next slide, Michael. Alrighty, so we are going to talk about reviewing data and analyzing data today. And our agenda for this session, which is going to be presented to you by me, Devin Camerata, Michael Bach, and Sydney Anderson. We're going to start by setting up our mindsets for data analysis. We're going to have a brief background on performance profiles, overview of the data-driven decision-making process, talk about the steps of interpreting data, sharing data, acting on data, and then rounding out the session with any questions that you all might have. You can go to the next slide. So like I said, we're going to be talking about mindsets today, and I'm about to drop in the chat box an article for you all. If you don't mind opening it up as soon as I drop it in. And I'm going to give you all a few minutes, probably about 3 minutes, to review this article, which is about the Stockdale Paradox, written by Jim Collins from the book Good to Great. And when we're entering the decision-making process, we need to set our minds in such a way that we are prepared to look at the most, what he calls brutal facts, the data that may be really hard to swallow, the data that may not be what we are ideally looking for in our situation, and be able to say, yep, this is what it is. And now what do we do? So if you guys, I'm going to set a timer for just 3 minutes. If you open up that article and go ahead and read through while considering the questions that are on the screen, such as why do optimists fail? What are your current mindsets or issues about facing data? What are the brutal facts that Admiral Stockdale faced? What are the brutal facts that you face? And what does it mean to hold on to hope that we will prevail in the end in our context? So like I said, I'm setting a 3-minute timer for us to all review. And you can go ahead. I'm seeing that some folks are having trouble opening the article because of technology blocks. So if you can try just either Googling Stockdale Paradox for a summary, or I can shorten the time and we will pause a little bit early. We're about halfway through our reviewing time. Fair Shay, thank you so much. She's going to drop a PDF of the article in the chat.
Just dropped it in the chat for everyone, Devin, if that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Fair Shay. Yeah, super helpful. So if everybody could open that, if you weren't able to access the link before. And we have a little less than a minute left to read and review. Alrighty, everybody, that's our timer. So we can go to the next slide. And I'm going to type in, and I don't think it'll pop up until we resend out the slides. But if somebody could either pop off mute or share in the chat box what some of your takeaways are from this article, particularly how it relates to your data engagement in your work. I'm going to give that direction just one more time. If somebody could either pop off mute or share in the chat box a takeaway that you have regarding the article that you just read, and even the quote on the slide here. What do you take away from that article in relation to your analysis of data when it relates to your work? Sonia, thank you so much for sharing in the chat box. She said, we must be real about the facts and make a plan according to the data. I'm going to add that to our slide over here. Mary,
Hey,
I see you
Devin.
popped off mute. Hey.
Yeah. Hi. I think that because when I was first reading it, I was like, well, of course you want to be an optimist. But then when he talks about, the difference, it's almost like being not even a realist, but like being too optimistic would mean that you just are kind of in a dreamland, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
That it's not reality. And so
Mhm.
when we look at our data and we're just like, oh, it's going to be fun. We're going to get this by, the end of the year or whatever, then you set
Mhm.
yourself up for being disappointed. Whereas if
Mhm.
you can, there's a difference in having faith that you're going to prevail, but maybe not by the end of, such and such a date. Because then when you don't meet that goal, then you're disappointed and you get disgruntled. And so I know in our district, we do what we call short-term wins.
Mhm.
So instead of just looking at the very end result, we look at we divide it up into like quarters, and we make our goal, we accomplish it in steps. And so it helps to be more realistic, but still positive and having faith.
Thank you so much for sharing. We have from Sabine, sometimes reality is harsh, but survival comes by facing and embracing reality head on. Very good. I'm going to save 10 seconds for any last thoughts about this article. Very good. I see a couple of things popping up into the chat box. I'm copying and pasting them into our slides so we have them captured for the future. And all of these takeaways are exactly, what we want you guys to pull from this article. Sometimes the facts are not what you want to see at whatever point that you're looking at them. However, you must believe that you are the right people in the right place to be getting those data pieces, those test scores, those class observations to that ideal point. And it's just a matter of continuing to do the work until it gets done. So we are going to move on to the next slide, and my dear colleague, Michael Bach, is going to take over, giving you some background on the 2021 data kits. Thank you so much for your engagement with that activity, everybody.
Thanks so much, Devin. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? I just want to make sure that I am doing well. Cool. I appreciate you kicking us off with that, because I think that framing, even if like when I first started doing data work, it wasn't exactly the like Jim Collins version, I think is a super useful framing, and I think a way of thinking about work that we use a ton. And I'm glad that we're getting to double click on that this morning. I'm going to tell you a little bit about fall 2020, 2021 data kits right now. And I feel like before I do, I want to narrate over that I feel like I feel very similar to how I felt as a teacher, giving a direction that involved telling students that under their desks is a piece of candy, and knowing that I had like intentions for what that candy would be used for, but that if I don't take time to sort of spell that out before I get all the directions out, the candy would be consumed and my intentions would be gone. And so in just a second, I'm going to give you time to go into your FTP folder to dig out from the network administration folder the fall 2021 data kit. Don't do it yet. We are going to take some time over the course of this presentation to dig into the fall 2021 data kit. And I want to tell you a little bit about what's in that data kit before you go and get it, and then promise you that we will spend the majority of the next 80 or so minutes together digging into that data kit so that you are not tempted to just start going through it immediately, because I think that that would be my impulse as a data person. I know y'all are super eager to dig into data on behalf of kids in your communities. And I don't want to, I'm afraid that if we just go and get them and dig in, we won't get a chance to sort of walk through some of the analytical steps that we find super useful on our end when starting to wrap our heads around data. In these data kits, these data kits are primarily sort of like populated with data from the 2020-2021 school year, and that is largely data that we as the department are not publishing this year. And so I think many of you have expressed an interest in getting and seeing the results from class observations over the past year and seeing results from a few other indicators that we collect data on at the department from the past year. And while we have some flexibilities in place around performance scores and ratings that we publish on School Finder, and those flexibilities allow sites to extend scores in some cases, we wanted to make sure that you as lead agencies had the sort of raw 2020-2021 observational data so that you could begin planning for the upcoming year and use that in your planning. And so I'm going to give you just a minute right now to go to the network administration folder of your FTP. In that network administration folder is a file that is called Fall 2021 Data Kit. If you have issues getting the data kit right now from your FTP, feel free to shoot Sydney Anderson a direct message in the chat, and she'll work super hard to get you to send that to you. But we've dropped all of the files and FTPs to make it super easy to access. So take like 45 seconds at this point to go into your FTP, open up the fall 2021 data kit. And in just a second, we'll start digging into some data analysis there. And it might be useful to have like a pen or a paper or something else to take notes on next to you. So take like 45 seconds, data kit, place to keep notes. The name of the folder in the FTP is the network administration folder. And the file is called Fall 2021 Data Kit, and it should also have your network name in that file. All right. If you're still pulling that up, feel free to keep doing that. But I want to provide a little bit of an overview of sort of the cycle that we often use when digging into data, and that we found super useful to structure our data and our planning around. This is a process called the data-driven decision-making process. It's quite likely that throughout the course of your work, you've encountered a version of this. And I think that we frequently find ourselves using this to guide the work that we do. And I think that sometimes it can be helpful to have a little bit of a framework. And I think that as we think through the initiatives and the programs and the policies that we pursue, we often go through a cycle of examining, being curious and identifying questions, collecting data, and all of the additional information we'd need, interpreting that data to identify trends, sharing that data with the relevant stakeholders, acting on that to make decisions. And then we find ourselves right back at the beginning of the cycle. And if you've seen a version of this that is a little bit different, I think that it's not worth. I think that there are a lot of different ways that these frameworks get outlined, and it's really useful to have those to guide our thinking. Today, we're going to dig in, I think, really specifically around interpreting, a little bit of sharing, and a little bit of acting in this data-driven decision-making cycle. I think that a lot of the collecting when it comes to the data in the data kits is already done, and a lot of that collection happens as a result of questions and examination that we've already set. And there'll definitely be a time, I think, to renegotiate some of those things. But I think for the purpose of planning for the upcoming year, it really makes sense to spend our time today double clicking on the interpret steps and the share, and then a little bit on sharing and acting. And so when it comes to interpreting data, we have typically taken that chance to use the data that we've collected to identify trends. And on our end, there are typically 4 big buckets of data interpretation that we engage in. And so the way we're going to spend, I think, the lion's share of our time together today is to dig into each of these 4 pieces a little bit and give you an opportunity to do some of this interpretation with the data kits that you just received. To give a little bit of a high-level overview of these steps for interpretation, the first one is to compare results with higher-level data, like state national standards or benchmarks. The second piece is to compare results within the data that you see. Another step, the third step that we find super useful and do rather frequently, is to compare results with other data sources. And then the last piece, which I think is a really important caveat, is always to make sure to analyze assumptions and dig into quality assurance and quality control. And so we're going to start with the first one now and dig in just a little bit more to the first step of interpreting data, comparing with higher level data. And I'm going to give you just a quick overview here, and then we'll work through an example together. And then we'll give you an opportunity to note some takeaways before we move on to the next step of data interpretation. One of the biggest and easiest, sort of like lowest level lifts when it comes to data interpretation is to compare your results with other results, other local results, perhaps state results or national results, as well as potentially to compare those to known benchmarks. Sometimes we know, for example, that like tools like TS Gold have widely held expectations, and that could be a comparison that makes a lot of sense in this first category of data interpretation. How do the students in my community compare with the widely held expectations established by Gold? Another example here of how you could compare results to higher level results is how do the class scores in my community on a particular domain or overall compare with the network averages or the state averages or the national averages on those domains. Those are all some like really, I think, basic, basic questions to ask, but oftentimes I find it super helpful when I'm digging into data to remind myself to do that and to sort of structure out my work, especially when I'm in a position where I am getting just a little overwhelmed by data. I want to draw attention to one particular example here. One of the pieces of data in your data kits is the results from the fall 2020 DRDPK kindergarten entry assessment. You can see in this table is a screenshot from last year's data kits, and your data kits this year have a similar table. The percent of students in a particular parish that are meeting all of the readiness sort of state reporting thresholds in each of the domains. And so I'll give you a second here to just take a look at this example before you dig into your own data, and maybe take like 2 minutes to just try to take 2 minutes to develop one takeaway, comparing the parish results with higher level results. And just drop that in the chat. What do you notice when you interpret this data and you compare the results with higher level results from this data in the example? I'm keeping my eye on the chat to see folks' takeaways. I think it can be really easy to overthink. And if you get yourself into that bucket, kick yourself out of there. Don't overthink this. Just take a look at some of the data in this example and what are some of the ways in which these parish results compare to some of the higher level results. Yeah, Janae's got a great observation and a great interpretation piece here in the chat around the percent of kindergartners demonstrating readiness or hitting those thresholds is higher in the parish, and it's particularly higher among students in the parish who attended public pre-K, which is exactly the direction that we'd expect to see, and a cool observation. Yeah, Pam, I think hit that on the head. Sort of looking at in the other direction. I think that makes a lot of sense. Great. If you've got more observations, feel free to keep dropping them in the chat. But I do want to make sure that we provide an opportunity for you to dig into your data kits and to note some observations in the data that's specific to your community. And so if you want to pivot now to looking at your data kit and noting some data interpretations, I think we can take maybe 5 minutes for you to dig into your data kit. You're welcome to share those observations in the chat. But if it's something that you kind of want to keep in your notepad or in your notes to keep following up on, that can be another place to document it so that you're able to keep following up on that. So we'll take 5 minutes, dig into your data kits, happy to answer questions about this level of interpretation. And in 5 minutes, we'll move on to the sort of next step of data interpretation.
Mr. Michael,
Hey, Michelle.
look at there. You know my voice. I would have
I
never
do.
imagined.
Well, also
Oh.
the little square with your name is lighting up. What's up?
I wanted to know, on my data, it looks like it says 3-year-olds served, total publicly funded children by age is 296, but that may be right now that I'm thinking about it. That includes my Head Start children, I'm assuming?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That's based on the child count report stat, and so which does include Head Start.
Okay.
Folks, in the interest of time, I know that this type of interpretation will probably take more than 5 minutes. And I think that we really saw this presentation as a chance to sort of get a little teaser with data interpretation, but probably is only the beginning of a conversation. And so I think in the interest of time, I want to sort of move us along through some of the other interpretation steps. But just also want to note that if you have questions or want to come back to this, definitely do. The next step in the, or the second sort of like type of data interpretation that could be worth digging into is identifying trends within a data set. And Devin's gonna talk us through that, right?
I surely am. Sorry, my mute button was hiding from me. So yes, like Michael said, interpreting data and diagnosing the trends within your data set. So that's taking that wide lens from looking at kind of what's happening all over either the state or the parish and honing in on either a particular data set or a particular classroom, or finding that small window of things to figure out, okay, now let me start to ask the question, what is happening here? So you might ask yourself, what are the highest and lowest ratings in my data set? What are the wins? What are the areas of growth? Am I seeing a pattern of change over time? Is this something that this teacher started off the year really strong and then decreased in their scores over time, or vice versa? You also want to ask yourself what's missing from the data. Is there something happening in the story or the narrative of your school or your parish or your network that isn't captured in data? You don't want to dig too much into that, but just having it in the back of your mind, knowing that there might be more to the story, is something to just have nearby. And then lastly, what data is most alarming and what data is most assuring? That's going to guide your questioning and guide your thinking in what we'll be talking about in just a few minutes about what next steps to take. So if you jump to the next slide, I'm going to go over an example of what I would do to think through a data set like this. So this is an example of class scores by dimension for pre-K over time. And so what I did was I took a look at those questions from before. I looked at my highest and lowest ratings, and I just did a quick highlight of areas of strength. I see that positive climate is super high, productivity is super high. I see areas that will positively change. And then I took a look at what my lowest areas were over time, and I just did a quick highlight. So what I would do if I were you, take a quick 15 seconds. I'm going to kind of keep talking through, but just to look at one area, maybe star it in your FTP or your data kit, or make a note of where you want to focus your energies, and think, okay, what section do I want to focus on? Let me take a quick scan and find the highest and lowest points of that data set. So after I do that, I find my highest and lowest points. I'm thinking, okay, what are my wins? What are my areas of growth? And I'm going to also look over time and think, okay, I see that I have a positive climate score that's super high, but what else am I seeing about this story? I also see that even though it's been above average of 6 points the entire time, I see that it did have a decrease over time. The same story with productivity. It's one of my highest ratings, but there is a decrease over time. And I see, again, I'm looking at concept development, one of my lowest ratings, and it also had a decrease over time. But my language modeling, which we know is one of the most challenging aspects of class, and it is one of the lowest rating in this example of data sets, it had a positive trend. So by taking a second to not just think about, okay, where am I scoring high? Yay, good for the things that I did, and low, oh no, this is where I need to work. I might take a step back and think, okay, because I saw that there was differences in change over time, that might inform me on focusing instead of fully on language modeling and concept development. I might see that I can have a really quick win here by figuring out what caused this drop between 2017 and 2018 and target some really intentional interventions there, so that the next time I see data, this negative trend goes back to the positive. Same thing for positive climate. I might have skipped over this and said, oh, this, I'm great, I'm in the 6s, I'm good. But because I noticed that change over time, I think, this is something that I know is an easy win. I can easily fix this, decrease in change. I'm going to target some energy into that area. So to summarize, the questions that you should be asking yourself are your highest and lowest areas. What do you think is missing from the data? What data is most alarming and most reassuring? What is other, what can you do to compare in between data sets? And what patterns or trends change over time? And talking about that other, one of those other questions, how can I compare within? I might take a look and see and think back to some of the things that I did as a coach, or I might think about some of the things that my CCR&R did and know that they put a ton of effort in the 2016 and 2017 year, focusing on X element of the class scores and bringing that into the narrative of analyzing, this data might also help me decide what next steps to take when it gets to that point. So like I said, take about 30 seconds to figure out what area of your data, such as class scores, such as literacy rates, such as teacher certification quality, that you want to take a kind of deep dive like I just did into one small subset of your data. And then we will move on to the next slide. So take 15 seconds to do that. Alrighty, we can move on to the next slide. And I think it's popping back to Sydney.
Hey y'all, thanks, Devin. So we're also going to talk about relationships between data sets. So as you're reviewing this data, like perhaps the data that Devin just showed you, you might want to think about comparing your results with other data sources, like locally available data. So not just that high level data that Bach talked through earlier, but what's available to you locally. So thinking about what you have access to, what relationships might exist between data sets, and using that to think through what data would be the most useful to compare to, and then looking for how results compare to information you have elsewhere. So you have teacher satisfaction data, or use of tier 1 curriculum, or coaching result data. And then you might want to look through, data at different sites, and thinking through the trends you're seeing and whether they're causal or correlating. So like which data sets are influencing each other, and where you're kind of seeing things aligned, like perhaps teacher satisfaction rates are decreasing because children are scoring lower on gold assessments, or maybe children are scoring lower on gold assessments because their teachers are dissatisfied with their work. So really thinking through those questions about causation and correlation as you compare with locally available data. So we can go to the next slide. So here we have just one example, this literacy assessment performance data, and thinking through what other data you might want to compare with the outcomes shown here, and what especially locally available data you would want to compare with what you're seeing, and what connections can be made to this data. So if y'all want to think through for like 30 seconds, drop some ideas for what data you would compare that's locally available to you if this was your data, and just drop that in the chat, that would be awesome. So Pam in the chat, Pam from Jefferson Davis said that they have a kindergarten exit test that they conduct, and they would like to compare school site class scores to see if those are related. I think that's a great example of using multiple data sources that are available locally. I wonder too if curriculum implementation in pre-K classrooms could be compared here. That would be an interesting look. Okay. All right, I think that we can move on if nobody wants to put anything else in the chat.
Alrighty, and it's back to me now. So we're gonna finalize our interpreting data session on or by analyzing our assumptions. So in the last few slides, you have been given some tools, some questions, some prompts to dig deeply into the data, to compare it to other sources, to compare it internally to other things happening, to think about the narrative that's happening in your network. And one of the things that we know is that sometimes we either are a little too close to the situation, or maybe not even close enough to the situation. So we need to take some time to analyze our assumptions and ask ourselves some questions to figure out, are we really hitting the nail on the head with our understanding of this data, what the data is telling us, and what the data is telling us to do next? So some things you should ask yourself are, what environmental factors at the site level are influencing the data at the community level, state level, national level even? What are my first instincts about the causes of this data? Are my instincts flawed? Maybe there's something influencing your instincts about what's happening that might not be the full picture of the story, or you might know more than somebody else that would just be looking at the data as a blank slate. what do other people think about this data, pulling other ideas or other opinions in as you're trying to get a grasp on why is this, like I mentioned in my previous example, why did that positive climate trend decrease over time? What is happening there? Is your understanding of the center's director teacher relationship a true and accurate picture of why that might be changing? Have you considered other explanations? Did you jump to your first conclusion and say this is it, or did you think maybe it's X, maybe it's Y, maybe it's Z? And then again, what are you most concerned about in the data, and is that actually the most concerning issue, or is it something that you personally are most concerned about but may not necessarily be the most concerning thing for the early childhood network as a whole? That personally is one of my biggest challenges when reviewing data, is like I have my personal either pet peeves or things that I'm like, I care about this the most, but that might not be the thing that is actually the most leverageable for my network. So if we go to the next slide, we can see that there, in this slide, we have just a pretty simple table about the total publicly funded children by age and the number of children enrolled over time. So for example, many of you know that I oversee the birth to 3 seats pilot here at the department with many of our Ready Start networks that is targeting birth to 3-year-old children. So I might look at this data and be solely focused on the infants. And I might be like, why in the world did we go from 255 in 2017 to 161 in 2019? That is the most horrible thing that's ever happened. We need to focus on that right now and put all of our energy into that. However, I might need to take a step back and pull in some teammates for them to say, Devin, look, there's some other things going on. We also can see that there is a huge jump in 3-year-olds being served. That's probably because we have had some kids age out. We might have had some, COVID-19 happening. We might have had some other environmental factors that have changed, that your lens is too, tightly focused on those infants when we need to take a look at the whole picture. And maybe I'm not wrong to focus on that part, but having those other voices to say, is that really the whole story, is super important when you're taking a look at all of this. There's so much data that you have in front of you right now, and it can be really easy to get laser focused on that one thing that you care most about. Again, this is what I do a lot. So having those other people around you at your table saying, is that really the most important thing to focus on right now? Is that our biggest win? Is that something that we can leverage in the next 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, etc.? So that is a great segue into when you're pulling people in to help you analyze your data, you might also be sharing your data. So I'm going to pass it back to Michael. And Michael, go ahead and tell us about sharing data.
Thanks so much, Devin. I'm actually thinking that maybe before we dig into sharing data, it might be useful for us to pause for a quick opportunity for folks to dig into applying some of these 4 steps of data analysis to the data in your data kits. And so I think that I'm going to return back to this slide, which sort of has the overview of the 4 sort of big buckets of interpretation that most of our work falls into. And I'm going to give you a full 5 minutes now to dig into your data and come up with 2 to 4 takeaways that you notice in your data set. And in 5 minutes, we'll do a little round robin and share out. And so you'll want to make sure to use the next 5 minutes to have a takeaway ready to share, at least 1 to 2 takeaways ready to share. I'm also going to open a breakout room that you can opt into, and that breakout room is called Ask Bach a Question. And so as you're digging into this data, as you're digging into your data kits, there are some specific questions you want to know. You should be able to navigate into the breakout room by just joining a breakout. There should be a little option to join a breakout room in the bottom of your screen. And I'm going to hop there for the next 5 minutes if there are some specific questions or some specific things that you want to talk through. And then in 5 minutes, I'll pop back over here and we'll go over the major takeaways that you're starting to see as you do sort of like just a surface level interpretation of the data in your data kits. Let me know if you have any issues getting into the breakout room. I'm going to head over there right now, and I will, and in 5 minutes we'll join back. Just be ready to share that, at least have 2 to 4 takeaways ready to share.
Hello, can you hear us?
Sure can.
Yes, can. Yeah.
Hi, everybody.
Okay, are we in a breakout room?
I think
You're
we
not
are. I
in
can
the-
see names.
You're
I
not in the
see-
breakout room.
Oh,
If you would like to join the breakout room with Michael, if you click this at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah, I can
You'll
see it. It showed something. No, we don't need to. I just didn't know if I was automatically put in one.
Oh, perfect. Nope, you can use this time to dig into your data. You can also share in the chat box some takeaways that you've had, but this is your time to look through your materials if you'd like. But I'm also here, as are many of my teammates, to answer any questions that you might have.
How do you join the breakout room, Devin?
If you look down at the bottom of your screen where you see participants, chat, share screen, there's an icon that says breakout rooms. When you click that, a window will pop up and it says ask Bach a question. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a blue join. And if you click that, it should pop you into the breakout room.
Devin, do you want me to share my screen with how to do that? I've got a screen clip pulled up of it.
Yeah, but we also want the questions back to pop up again.
Say
The
one more
questions-
time.
I want to see the slide that we were screen sharing to show. So I am happy to do that. Let's see,
Thank you,
slide
Sydney.
14.
And Sydney, if you don't
Okay.
mind dropping a screen grab of the slide in the chat, maybe for people to have.
That's a great idea, actually, because I can't share my screen, so I'm not a host.
Perfect.
Okay. Just a moment.
Devin, I've gone ahead and put that screen grab of how to join the breakout room in the chat. So if anyone
Awesome.
trying to figure out what to do, I just went ahead and highlighted the buttons.
Thank you so much, Farishay.
Devin.
Okay. And the data interpretation slide is loading. Okay, it should be in the chat.
There it is. Good job, Sydney.
Hey guys, can y'all share that screen again that had those thought questions that we were supposed to kind of be discussing?
Yeah, I can't share the screen because I'm not a host, but I did drop it in the chat so you can open it and view that slide again.
I don't see it in the chat.
Hey, Nicole.
Message it to directly.
Also, Nicole, we sent out the email with all the resources from today. So if you want to check
All
your
right.
email.
Yep, I will open it. Thank you.
Yep.
Sydney, I also did just make you a co-host if you'd like to share your screen.
Thanks, Lizzie. All right, y'all should be able to see now. Hey, Ellen, I see your question in the chat. It's in your network administration folder. That's where your data kit is.
Hey y'all, in the interest of time, was I think a little distracted by some super exciting conversations in the breakout rooms. I'm curious if any folks have some major takeaways from the data interpretation that they'd like to share before we dig into the other two steps of the data-driven decision-making process. Feel free to either take yourself off mute or drop those in the chat, but would love to hear a couple takeaways from across the state.
So we'll share and say Martin. Okay, so we just kind of know that this is going to take a lot more time than what we're doing right now to really look at data and make some decisions, as well as you're going to have to bring more people to the team when you are going to share this in your leadership team meetings, and possibly bring in our resource and referral if there's some harder conversations that need to have with certain program partners that scores maybe are not as high as what we like them to see. We have seen improvements, which is great for us. We also saw the same trend about enrollment changing. I think one key factor is not only to look at data from year to year, but look at it in the sense of 5 years, because then it's not so alarming when we think about what the pandemic did to all of our numbers and scores. So when you look at it as over a 5-year period, that's another way to kind of look at the data.
Yeah, super, super thoughtful. I love the thought process there. Any other folks?
Hi, it's Angela with EBR. I was impressed by our scores going up for engaged support for learning. And my follow-up would be to look at the number of sites that are using Tier 1 curriculum, because I know in our network we did a big push for curriculum over the last couple of years, and to see if there's any correlation there. Another one, I just had a question about those enrollment numbers, and what virtual students, they weren't counted in enrollment for last year. Like a lot of the Head Starts were virtual, and I was just trying to see where they counted.
Yeah, I think that we, I think that last year we did include virtual students if they were receiving like their primary, in Head Starts, if they were receiving their primary sort of funding and experience through Head Starts.
Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael, this is
yes.
from Bosher. Adding to what you just said, starting this year, you're also going to have some issues with that data, because there a lot of Head Start centers were having to do a combination of. But the key is what you said. as long as they're providing services, to the client is fine. Now, looking at our data and actually our base being 2016 to 2017, all we've done is increase our level of proficiency as a network, and then as each one of our partners. The only data that, and then we knew it, and we have it in our blueprint, and it continued to be consistent, is the drop on public funded enrollment, and unfortunately that's out of our control because it's the loss of population, and it's affecting our funded enrollment. So there is some very good data here, and of course I was waiting for this to also include it in my blueprint that is due coming soon. That's it for me.
Thanks for sharing so much, Manny.
Hey,
Appreciate
Mike.
those thoughts a ton. Hi.
Hey, Mike, I'm sorry. It's Lee Griffin here from EDR. And I just had a quick thing. So we saw a really good increase in our scores from 1920 to 2021. And one of the things that I wonder, and it's just a wonder, last year, because of all the excess grant funding within our network, we created a incentivized teacher stipend. So if teachers scored a certain amount in that fall period, they received a certain amount of funds from that grant. And so that huge jump in scores, we saw our directors really, really interested in logging into the portal and seeing how their teachers scored. So I'm wondering if that was something that had anything to do with it. And if so, how do we replicate that going forward, incentivizing their participation and therefore increasing their want to achieve higher?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's like exactly the sort of questioning that like drives that data-driven decision-making process. And I like am resisting the impulse to dig specifically into just like talking through that right now, because I feel like if I did, I would blow up our sort of time for the remaining planning periods, because I think we could talk about that all day in terms of like how to, do a really good job collecting data there and understanding the impacts and whatnot. But I think that's exactly like the right way to go. And I think that starting to think through like some other data sets and stuff to draw in would make, I think is exactly the direction to go. Anyone want to get the final word in before we move on to some of the final steps in the data-driven decision-making process?
Michael, I do have one point that we heard from St. Martin that I do want to just stamp for everybody in the room and the Zoom, that this process is something that is not meant to be done in necessarily, an hour-long session with the department or even a day or a week. It's something that you should be doing over time. So if you're feeling a little bit of like panic in your chest, like, oh my gosh, we got to get a whole bunch of stuff done by the end of this session, please do not feel that way. If you ever are analyzing this data and you're, have questions that you'd like to bounce off of the team here at the department or other folks, this is definitely a time consuming process. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, great point, Devin. And I think I think I always want to make sure that this is the sort of stuff that we all love nerding out about. And so if you find yourselves wanting a thought partner or wanting to nerd out here, I think our office is full of folks who would love to do that. I want to walk us through and talk through some of the final steps of the data-driven decision-making cycle that might be relevant here, just to make sure that as we, and I think that many of us are already starting to go in this direction, but just to make sure to stamp this, because I often think that when this isn't done well, this is where a lot of sort of progress gets hindered. I think that as a community lead agencies across Louisiana are generally really good at sharing data. And I want to take a second to stamp that and give us a second and give us some time to think through what that might look like here. I think that this step of the process is a really critical component in between interpretation and acting because of the opportunity it provides to build buy-in around the decision-making. And it both can help, sharing data can both help refine the decision-making and get clearer on what our great takeaways and get clearer on the interpretation, but it can also help build buy-in for the acting part and make sure that folks across your networks are excited about any pivots that come as a result of digging into this data and the interpretation that comes from digging in there. So to provide like just a little bit of an overview here, I think that sharing data after interpreting can help bring stakeholders together to take that action. And I think that there are two pieces, like two categories of folks that I often think through when I'm thinking through who we share data with after I've done some interpretation. One is the folks who are responsible for implementing solutions. If there is somebody who will be in, if I am starting to think through some potential actions, or I am thinking through some interpretations, thinking through who would be responsible for implementing solutions is always a group that I want to make sure I hear from and get their take on in between the interpreting and the acting part of the data-driven decision-making process. The other piece is folks who might benefit from potential solutions. Who are the folks that, if sort of a gap is closed, or if something that I notice in interpretation becomes closer to the like one day that we are all driving towards, who would benefit from that? Making sure to include those people in between the interpreting phase and the acting phase can be incredibly important. And so some of the pieces that I want to double click on around sharing is to share results with stakeholders in a timely fashion. I'm sure that there's some folks that are snickering under their breath at me at the LDOE talking about sharing things in a timely fashion, but I think that this is a thing that we strive very hard towards because of how useful it is in helping build the ACT component of the data-driven decision-making process. I also think that engaging partners in reviewing the results and interpreting them versus just providing sort of like some takeaways can be really useful. I also think that this process can help uncover and unearth underlying causes for challenging areas. And I think that I have always found that in the sharing phase, I learn things that I didn't previously know. But I've also found that this phase can be really, this is turned into my favorite phase because of how generative this part can be around new ideas to plan for change and the opportunity to bring folks together and build buy-in for the solutions. I also think that sometimes we find ourselves sharing data that is not great, data that we know we need to work to fix. And I think that sometimes when sharing data like that, I definitely get a pit in my stomach. And one of the things that, or a few of the things that have helped me with messaging that are to emphasize opportunity, teamwork, and partnership. And so if the data isn't, I think that I've had some conversations already today with folks that are looking at data and excited about the opportunity to dig in because it represents a gap they're excited to close. And I think that as you think through sharing that data, some of the things that can be really useful is to emphasize opportunity, raising awareness of how the team or an organization can devote resources to an area that needs to change and that there's an opportunity to keep growing, and framing, and I think always framing sort of those growth areas as sort of the natural next step is a really helpful way to emphasize the opportunity. I think another piece that helps with sharing data that can put a little bit of a pit in folks' stomachs is to emphasize the teamwork. Areas of challenge often belong to a large group of folks, to a huge team, and emphasizing the way in which that team is going to sort of collaborate to close that gap can often, I think, turn conversations about tough data away from sort of frustration and into solutions. And the last piece is partnership. I think that there are often partners and resources and research and best practices that can help, and highlighting the opportunities to take advantage of existing resources versus just sort of like finding a solution in isolation can help make the process of digging into tough data a little bit smoother, especially as you're digging in with stakeholders. I'm going to give you maybe just like 15, 20 seconds if you want to pause right here. I know that we have moved really fast today, and that is because this is a huge cycle and we really want to make sure that we provide a lot of overview. But I do want to give just a couple minutes if there are some thoughts as a result of the sharing conversation that you want to jot down, maybe potential folks that you would like to share the data with, maybe a component of the opportunity, teamwork, partnership way of framing data, or something else that you want to jot down to return to later. I want to make sure you have the opportunity to do that before we move into the final step, which is acting. So we'll take just like 20 seconds for some quick notes before we dig into acting. And the last sort of step in the data-driven decision-making process is acting. And Sydney, I think you're going to walk us through this one, right?
Yeah, thanks, Doc. Yeah, so we're back to this little graphic again. So we've examined, collected, interpreted data using those kind of 4 steps. We've shared data, and now we're ready to make some decisions. So, acting on data, we can go to the next slide. Like Devin was saying earlier, you have this data and you should spend a lot of time, going through it and thinking about how you want to act on it and make decisions. And that can include long-term and short-term strategies to address the root causes for what you're seeing, and also build momentum for problem solving, and using those short-term actions to develop longer-term strategies and solutions. So you can be influenced by the thought of ease in solving a problem. You might want to dig deeper and start diving into solutions that are going to take longer to implement and maybe be more difficult, but have broader impacts. So short-term actions can be done with a quick turnaround. So those might be cheap or quick or small scale, easy wins. And then long-term actions can focus on the activities that will have the most impact. So addressing root causes, perhaps collecting more data to investigate kind of like an assumption you have, and taking the time to plan and prepare for taking that action. And you want to make sure that your short-term actions are kind of plugged in to the longer-term solutions that you're hoping to implement. So we actually have a great example that we wanted to share in Natchitoches, where they have taken, like throughout the year as they were developing and collecting data, they were comparing child enrollment data to capacity data at their sites, and identified a lot of gaps in, how many kids a site was licensed to serve and how many kids they were actually serving. So the folks in Natchitoches communicated with sites about the reason for those gaps. And sites, one thing that sites mentioned was an issue, was that there was a difficulty hiring and retaining teachers, which I'm sure everybody has and everybody knows about. So they developed a cheap and quick solution to kind of support these sites in hiring and retaining teachers by developing a unified application for staff at Type 3 centers. And it was just a Google form shared via social media, where prospective teachers could apply to all of the Type 3 centers at one time, which was creating competition between sites to increase pay and increase the turnaround time to hire teachers, and helped get classrooms open quicker, and hire teachers who were really excited about the work. So they've continued to use the application both via social media and job fairs, and prospective applicants still complete the form. And it has really helped to increase the capacity of those sites and to help them with kind of an administrative task that could take a lot of time, but make it easier for all of them. So I think we can also, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that you mentioned competitive between the childcare centers, but I would say it's more of the edge of urgency. It created that sense of urgency to be very responsive to those who applied to a job within that the community network of Natchitoches, right? And if the competitiveness was, it was never like in a sense of a negative competitiveness. Certainly that it developed that sense of urgency to certainly reply and reach out and be very urgent in their response to the applicants. That's all.
Thanks so much, Minda. Yeah, so does anybody have any questions about this strategy, or maybe want to take 30 seconds to share some things that you think could be easy, quick solutions to something you've seen or something you've tried before? Cool. Well, I think we can move on.
So I know that we promised that we would spend from 9 to 10:20 this morning digging into data, and we want to deliver on that promise. But obviously, this is a process that will take, I think, much longer than from 9 to 10:20 this morning. And so before we sign off and move on to digging into the other parts of the collaboratives today, I think Devin and Sydney and I wanted to make sure that we paused for a quick opportunity to answer any questions that might exist as y'all are thinking about how to take sort of this like fire hydrant amount of information forward. If there's anything, any additional information that like would be really useful to have right now, I think we'd definitely love to provide that. Great. Well, I do think all of us know that this is a process that is only that happens sort of over the course of every day that we work on super challenging, super worthy work like the work we're doing right now. And I think all three of us are super eager to remain to be partners in doing this. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us if, as you're going through this process, you have questions or concerns or things that you want to dig into more, either as a direct follow-up to this presentation or about the data-driven decision-making process more broadly. I think that the plan is for us to return to COLA, to return for sort of the second session around the Believe application at 10:30. And so we want to make sure, I want to make sure that you have a second to take care of anything outstanding before then to return to dig into that. We'll obviously be on the line to answer questions, and I think it's planned to be back at 10:30 for the Believe application session.
All right, everybody, welcome back. It is 10:30 on the dot, so we're going to get started with our second session. Today, our second session in the collaborative is going to talk about the very exciting opportunities through the Believe application that are available for all of our lead agencies. So we'll do an overview, then we'll break down all 4 categories and round it out with a timeline and contact information for each of those categories, should you have follow-up questions. So at the Department of Education, these are our belief statements. This is what guides our decision-making. And as you can see from the slide, children are our highest priority. We believe families are our partners. Educators are valued professionals. Graduates must be ready. Equity matters. Choice expands opportunities. Schools are invaluable to communities, and our future is bright. And these are Louisiana's goals and priorities. You'll note that of the 6 critical goals, that very first one, that students enter kindergarten ready, is very important to us, and I believe affects all of the rest of the goals on that list. So you will see that all of our Believe dollars that we're putting up really just work toward that bigger goal of having students enter kindergarten ready. You'll also notice that a lot of these educational priorities are reflected in the Believe application and guidance. So we released an early childhood planning guide. I'll click on it just for a moment. For the 22-23 school year, this is what is guiding our application. So the Believe guidance broke down 4 categories that were really important to us in the early childhood sector. The first being that Louisiana needs to strengthen the child care system to meet the needs of all families and to support the stabilization of the child care sector. The second is that we aim to increase the supply of and access to high quality early childhood opportunities that can be sustainable in the long term. The third is that we want to prepare and support our wonderful early childhood teachers to lead classrooms with high quality interactions and meet the needs of our children every day. And finally, we really want to engage and empower families to access the tools and resources they need to support their child as they're developing. So you'll notice that the planning guide that we previously released is broken down into these 4 categories, as is our Believe application. So the framework has 4 categories, like I said, the 4 that I just mentioned. They're all aligned with an LDOE priority. Each category is further subdivided into activities. These activities are not necessarily required, but they're recommended, and some of them are supported through Believe funding through the application process. There's also funding guidance in the framework, and finally, there are resources linked in the framework. So I encourage you to take a look at the framework. Maybe as you're looking at the application, then review the framework and see how they're kind of, working together. So the application for Believe dollars, I did want to differentiate how it's different than Super App. So Super App is going to continue to be an application that is submitted every year. It's the opportunity to apply for LA4 and NSECD seats. Birth to 3 seats. This is where you would report your local match for the Early Childhood Education Fund, and finally for CLSD funding for curriculum and professional development. And we anticipate that the Super App is going to be an annual occurrence. The Believe application is an opportunity for our lead agencies to apply for limited stimulus dollars. So this is not an application that will be released every year indefinitely. This is a limited application. This one is being released for you to apply for the 22-23 school year, and there will be one more we anticipate next year for you to apply for the following year. And then that's it. These are stimulus dollars that will eventually expire. This is only available for community network lead agencies to apply for. And this is a place for you to apply for funding to support those 4 categories I previously mentioned: childcare stabilization, access expansion, quality supports, and last but not least, family engagement. So a little bit of information about the funding for Believe. We sent you an email earlier today with the application planning template. And in that planning template, there's an appendix that includes the maximum funding that each network can request per category. Due to the funding source, funding for categories 1 through 3 cannot be spent on school-based pre-K, Head Start, or early Head Start seats. And then the category 4 funding is for family engagement supports and community-wide supports for families, regardless of a child's enrollment status. I also want to encourage you to keep in mind that when you're making this request, lead agencies are allowed to take indirect costs on this funding. So if that's something that you need to keep in mind, I know a lot of school systems require you to take the maximum amount for your indirect cost. So as you're calculating what you'd like to request and how much funding you'd like to request, that might be a factor to make sure you can incorporate that in. And finally, you know, there's a lot of funding, but at the same time, it is limited in some ways. We have 66 community networks and have to split it up as equitably as we can. So we encourage you that if you have to make tough decisions about what this funding goes toward, we would like you to prioritize providers who serve a significant number of publicly funded seats. So I'll give you a brief explanation as to how we came up with those numbers you're finding in the appendix of the Achieve Planning template. Category 1, which is childcare stabilization funding, was calculated based on the number of classrooms in type 3 centers in each network. It came out to be approximately $1,700 per classroom in the breakdown. Category 2 was an access expansion category, and actually we just kind of opened it up to any network who was interested in applying can apply for that maximum amount of $35,000. Category 3 was also calculated based on the number of classrooms in type 3 centers in that network. That one ended up being approximately $950 to $1,000 per classroom. And finally, category 4 was calculated based on the number of birth to 3 children living in the network who are economically disadvantaged. And based on how many children you have that fit that description, that's how we determined funding for that final category. I will say, if any of you have questions about the funding that was set aside for your network, please feel free to reach out to me or to other folks on the team if you're unsure how we came to that calculation, or if you have any further questions. So just to frame up what's going to happen, 4 of our teammates have kind of captained each of these categories, and they're going to talk about what you're eligible to apply for in each, kind of what the application looks like, and give you the opportunity to ask any questions, but also, just open up the floor for some thought-provoking questions. So Devin Camerata is going to talk to us about category 1, which is childcare stabilization. Right before I go on mute and turn it over to Devin, I do want to say that the previous iteration of our category 1 was COVID-19 Community Recovery Grant. So many of you are familiar with that. It's very, very similar to that, just kind of morphing into a different name and being a part of the Believe application moving forward. So I'm going to let Devin take it away.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. So if you go to the next slide, we're going to talk about kind of the different initiatives that the category 1 childcare stabilization component of this application is intended to cover. Like Lizzie said, this is a new iteration of what was previously known as the Community Recovery Grant. And it is continuing to push forward the main initiatives that we wanted to see addressed in that grant, but now through childcare stabilization as its name. So the four main components of those are workforce incentives, enrollment support, direct payments to sites for operating costs, and then personal protective equipment and other sanitation materials. So those are the four main buckets that were still the same from the community recovery grant. And we know that, COVID or any kind of major health situation is not going away. And this will not be the only time that something like this happens, where we need to be able to protect our children, protect our staff, and protect each other, which is why personally protective equipment or any consumable materials like diapers, wipes, paper towels, those things that we know are critical for the functioning of a center during any time, but as we can see, there's a specific chunk of these funds that are specifically for that, so that you guys and your centers can be able to make sure that you are doing, you're getting the materials that you need to operate. And the order of this is also really important. We have workforce incentives at the top, and that's the last thing I'm going to talk about on this slide, because as I was reading all of your RFAs for the community recovery grant last year and then this past year, back in, I think, May, that y'all submitted that, almost every single network iterated that workforce was an area where every single center, every single parish is struggling. So we want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to put funding in the hands of our teachers, to keep them employed, to keep them wanting to be a part of this profession, to keep our centers open with excellent staff. So I highly encourage you all to focus as much energy as you can on creatively using these dollars to ensure that you are having all of your staff stay in centers, having them stay happily in your centers, and to be able to see this profession as a long-term place for them where they can take care of their families. So if we go to the next slide, I do want to just reiterate what Lizzie said already about the funding logic. This estimates approximately $1,700 per classroom. And if you are curious about what your network's funding for this category is, you can look at the appendix in the Believe application, excuse me. And I do want to address that many of you may see a shift in the kind of max funding amount for your network because of this change in logic. And we know that, funding logic changes over time as the needs of the state shift, as the funding amounts shift. And I just encourage you all, if you're seeing these numbers and have any kind of reaction that is like, oh, I wish there was more, or, oh, I'm confused about why this changed. Think about how you can really strategically use the funding from the past years, if you have any left over, how you have used that in the past, and then how you can move forward, maximizing these funds. And if you have any questions about how to strategically use these funds, please reach out to me or each other for some of those really creative ways to deal with those funds. And Lizzie, if you go to the next slide. So here's an example of what you might see in your budget description for category 1. So for example, like I'm going to continue talking about those workforce incentives. You're going to have a really simple, straightforward table where you're going to input the initiative on the side, the description of what you intend to do, and the approximate amount, what your initiative will cost. And in that description, we would ask for you to be as specific as possible. We know that this application is not the final budget going into EGMS, but it will help us inform whether or not this funding amount is appropriate for the initiative that you're taking, whether or not there's any flexibility. And if we see exactly how you're intending to spend those funds, we can approve your application faster. We can use those as best practices to help other networks. And the main takeaway here is as specific as possible is a best practice. So for example, here you can see that the description says all teachers in type 3 centers will receive a quarterly stipend of $250, a total of 60 teachers across 5 centers that multiplication or that formula is really straightforward. I know as a department staff member, I'm reading 250 times 60 times 5 times 4 for the quarter of the year equals out to $15,000 for that amount. So again, be as specific as possible, be really clear with what you're going to spend that funding on in your description. And yeah, and that is super great and helpful. Alrighty, so then the last part for the application is the narrative section, which you've been asked to do in previous applications or previous RFAs, but in 500 words or less. So I want to emphasize that this does not need to be a novel. It doesn't need to be a whole landscape analysis, just a really simple, straightforward, here's why we chose to spend our money this way. Here's how we anticipate this helping our network. And these are the, the outcomes we intend to see from spending these dollars in this way. You may also want to include data from your network that supports the need. For example, 8 of our 8 centers, gotta move my thing, all have had trouble with turnover. So we're intending to spend X number of dollars on workforce incentives. Again, brevity here is going to be really critical. However, making sure that the words that you do use or the sentences that you do put in give as clear of a picture as possible of what's happening in your network, so we know that you are making really strategic choices with the choices with the spending that you're doing with category 1. And I believe that's my last slide. I think there's one more. So for our reflection here, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one ahead. The best practices. So what you have done in the past, I kind of captured here on this slide. So thinking about ways that you have been surveying type 3 centers to figure out what the directors are seeing as their greatest challenges and needs, to get a really, really clear picture of what the workforce looks like in your network at these type 3 centers. Take time to do a survey of your teachers and see how long they intend to stay in their role. What, if anything, will help them stay longer if they're considering leaving. What amount financially would make a difference for them? $250 every quarter may not be the number that gets them to stay, but maybe 500 or 1,000 or one bigger chunk of money at one time rather than several smaller chunks of money. Just getting that deep information in your research before submitting this application really could mean the difference in keeping some teachers versus losing some. And then lastly, transparency in the decision-making between lead agencies and the providers. Really make sure you engage those providers. I know many of you did this and had conversations and talked to me and said, oh, I talked to so-and-so from Busy Bees or ABC Learning Center, and she wants to spend her money this way. Is this something that we can do? That is excellent. Getting them as engaged as possible with this funding is going to invest them in the initiatives that you are pursuing with this funding. And they really are, your partners in this work, and they can give you a lens that you might not have had at the level that you are. And they may be able to know that, like I said, in that previous example, that $250 4 times a year may not be the thing that makes a difference for a teacher, but a one-time payment of $1,000 may be the thing that actually, fits their needs better. So we can go to the next slide. And so, like I said, please reach out to me at any and every point of your application writing process. If you have any questions, have ideas, you're stuck on something and you would like some brainstorming support, please reach out to me. Y'all have been doing great with that the last 2 years with, the previous iteration. So I just encourage you to continue to do that. We could go to the final slide for real this time. So I would love if anybody would like to pop off mute or share in the chat box. What data do you already have from this request, information that you would like to gather, factors that you want to consider, and information you have about workforce retention in your centers. We're not going to spend too terribly long here, but if anybody would like to pop off mute, we can. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it back over to Lizzie And we'll move on to the next category. Pam in the chat box said, when will the grant be awarded, an approximate date the funds will be ready to spend? Lizzie, do you know the answer to that?
I do. So we hope that we will send this to April Bessie, which would mean the funds would be ready for you to spend July of 2022 to June of 2023.
And for the record, that's the same timeline as the community recovery grant had been the past 2 years. So your community recovery grant funds are available through June 30th of 2022. And ideally, like Lizzie said, that transition from the community recovery grant to the Believe application funding would hopefully be a seamless transition.
Thank you so much, Devin.
Thank you.
We're going.
Devin, can you hear me? This is Miss Taylor from City of Okaloosa.
Hey.
Hey, listen, I was just wondering, since this is in the future, like for July, I have two type 3 centers that are in the process of their licensing. I haven't heard anything back, maybe about 2 or 3 weeks that I got the first email saying that they were in the process. So is that something I should consider, that they might possibly be in, because that's 2 extra centers that's going to be in with what I already have. So just projecting, looking into the future. So when I apply for this, is that something I need to put in there too? Or I'm already, you said that the appendix, tell us how much.
Yeah, so, we had to kind of draw a line in the sand somewhere of what we're going to set these parameters on. And that's, like Lizzie said in the chat box, the 2021, 2022 class portal, what we have there. However, we of course want to support any new type 3 centers that are opening. And for the last 2 years, that has happened a couple of times where the network had more centers apply from when they started to, or more centers become type 3 from when they applied to when they received the funds. So what I would encourage you to do is just make sure that you really clearly include that in your narrative section. And when you're requesting funding, request funding for, what the amount of centers that you have, with the note that the final decisions will be made based on a combination of what the parameters we've already set, and knowing that if we have any flexibility to make room for those extra centers with funding, we will do our best to make that happen.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Hope that those centers become type 3 soon. That's really exciting for your area. The only other thing I'll add before we move on is that we know some of you have relationships with the family childcare providers that are CCAP certified in your area. Some of you might not, but some of you do, and some of you have included them in the past in the community recovery grant. So if that is a relationship that you've already had formed and you're already engaged with these folks, please let Devin know so she knows to anticipate that and we can have conversations about that. All right, so we're going to move on to category 2. This is being championed by my colleague, Amy Poirier. Unfortunately, she was not able to join us today, so I'll be sharing her slides. So category 2's focus is on access expansion. So this is a cool and different opportunity that we're providing for lead agencies to increase access to high quality care in their community. So through the Believe application in category 2, lead agencies can apply for funding to support owners and administrators of existing type 3 centers and also CCAP certified family childcare providers to expand their services to increase the number and ages of children they're able to serve. So I'll dive into a little more detail about what that could look like and what iteration that could take in your network. I do want to say that all lead agencies are eligible to apply for this funding, including those who are currently involved in the community supply building and access expansion grant. So again, these activities in category 2, we hope to support existing childcare centers and CCAP certified family childcare providers to expand services, either to increase the number of children they're serving or open up a new age bracket that they weren't previously serving. And what this might look like might include supporting a site to increase the number of children served in an existing classroom that's already opened. Maybe that's equipping the classroom with additional furnishing that is needed, or materials or equipment. Also, it might be supporting that center in hiring and onboarding and training an additional teacher or staff to meet the needs of increasing the number of children served. So that's the first possibility that might be used with this funding. The second possibility might be to support a site to open a new birth to 3 classroom in an existing space already licensed for children within the facility. So for example, maybe there's a type 3 center that has a room that hasn't been used for a while, that doesn't have a classroom in it. Maybe it's ready to go. Maybe there's not a teacher for it, or they've had trouble finding staff for it. There could be any number of reasons, but if there's a childcare center that would like to open up a new birth to 3 classroom within their facility, lead agencies can apply for this funding to equip that classroom with the furnishings, materials, and supplies needed to make it successful. Again, hiring and onboarding staff to help meet the needs associated with serving more children. Finally, they could also help the staff with enrollment efforts, including events, advertisements, and other costs associated with enrolling more children into the program. Another activity that could be supported by this funding could be to help a CCAP certified family childcare provider with equipping their space with furnishings and materials and equipment, and assisting them with enrollment efforts, including advertising and covering the other costs previous to the one I said just right before. I will say that our intention with this funding is to ultimately serve more birth to 3 children. That's what we want this category for. That's our ultimate goal here, is to serve more birth to 3 children. It's not just an equipment and classroom furnishings section. It's if you are purchasing equipment or you are purchasing classroom furnishings, it's with the intent of serving more kids. Just a side note, like I said before, this funding cannot be used for early Head Start, and early childhood programs within schools. So what the application would look like is this table. You would select one activity in the very first column. Are you helping a site increase the number of children served in an already existing classroom? Are you trying to open a new classroom in a licensed facility? Or are you supporting a CCAP certified family childcare provider? Site name, what kind of site type you're helping, and then how many children you anticipate you will serve with this, once these improvements are made. Describe the proposed activities. Do you plan to purchase materials? Do you plan to hire someone new or help them with their first month's salary? Do you plan to help with an enrollment events, And then finally, how much that would cost. So we recognize that for some of you, $35,000 might not seem like a lot. For some of you, it might seem like a lot, just depending on the size of your network. But no matter what, when you're trying to figure out what you can do with this category, we recommend that when you're trying to figure out what providers to pursue these access expansion activities with, think about the number of publicly funded children they're currently serving. We, of course, encourage you to prioritize sites that are serving a high number of children whose tuition is paid for through public funding. We'd also like you to consider the length of time in business. Have they been open within the past 12 months, or are they preparing to be open very soon? We think that this could really help get a jump start to some of those new centers who need help in enrollment. And finally, can you realistically in a year's time increase the number of children served in this facility? This is a little bit like low-hanging fruit. We realize it's still difficult to do, but it's not necessarily opening up a brand new site. It's not necessarily, starting from the ground up. This is intended to be a site that already exists that you can, within a year, open up more seats for children who desperately need it. So again, I do want to emphasize that if you have any questions, please reach out to my colleague, Amy Poirier, who is really leading this cause. But in the meantime, some things to think about as you're deciding whether or not you want to apply for this funding in category 2. Think about how could funding for access expansion help meet your network goals and objectives. I know a lot of folks who have access expansion in their blueprint. How could this funding help support the goals that you have established in your blueprint? Are there providers already working to expand access that could use the funding and support in the short term? So again, you've got 1 year for this funding, July of 2022 to June of 2023. Are there providers that in that timeframe could realistically use this funding to expand? That kind of ties into the third question. Are there providers who could expand through these easily accomplished activities if they have funding and support to do so? And finally, just thinking about it, how can you involve your network partners? If you're an advisory, if you're a Ready Start network, how can you incorporate your advisory council to help determine what activities could be accomplished in 1 year and what funding is needed to do so? So this is just some food for thought as you're thinking about whether or not this category is something you would like to pursue. Please direct your questions to Amy Poirier. We're really excited to see what creative solutions folks come up with and how many more children we're able to serve as a result of this activity. So with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleagues, Leslie and Charlene, who are going to talk about category 3, which is all about supporting and improving quality.
Thanks, Lizzie. So good morning, everyone. Category 3 has a lot of overlap with everything that we've included within our super app applications, except like we've mentioned before, this is funding that's more targeted to our early learning centers, our type 3 childcare providers. So we all know that all children should enter kindergarten ready for success in school and beyond. And in order for that to be true, we must have classrooms and educators that are ready to respond to children's emotions with sensitivity and warmth, that they're organized so that they can manage child's attention, time, and their behavior, that they promote child's learning through engaging language and interactions, and that they support child development with high quality instructional tools, such as our early learning and development standards, high quality curriculum, assessment, and utilizing the class tool. And we have done this by communities prepare and support teachers to lead classrooms and provide high quality interactions that meet the developmental needs of all children every day. So all of the activities related to this category have to do with high quality classrooms and supporting that need. So activity 1 is mostly focused on curriculum and making sure that all classrooms are equipped with high quality curriculum and have the developmentally appropriate learning resources that they need so that children can successfully use that curriculum. Activity 2 is more about our professional development, looking at professional development opportunities to support the curriculum, to support high quality interactions and implementation of instructional tools. Activity 3 is targeted to supporting not only the social and emotional well-being of children, but also the educators and caregivers that are working with those children and providing additional mental health supports and trauma-informed supports if needed. Activity 4 is to enhance our developmental screening initiative. So it's assisting communities with a planning to identify children in need of intervention through that universal developmental screening process. And activity 5 is making sure that communities and school systems providing those classrooms with support, with professional development opportunities and service support for young children with disabilities so that we can increase the number of inclusive opportunities within a least restrictive environment. And as Lizzie kind of mentioned earlier, a lot of this funding there will be future funding opportunities that is targeted specifically for our CCAP certified family child care providers to receive curriculum, PD, and or other supports that are included within this category. But just note that the requests targeted in this category are specific for our type 3 early learning centers. And also with a priority given to those who are serving a large number of publicly funded children. Okay, so just a few questions to think about as we begin looking at this activity and some of the activities found within this category. So like I mentioned, the first activity is about equipping our classrooms with curriculum, with that high quality curriculum and developmentally appropriate learning resources and materials. So a high quality curriculum ensures that children have the experiences they need for school readiness by engaging in a classroom with in developmentally appropriate learning. Curriculums help teachers plan the day and keep children engaged through learning activities. A quality curriculum is based on the most up-to-date research of how children learn. And it's designed to build the skills needed and that are age appropriate for children at that age and at that level of development. And a high quality curriculum also ensures that children have the experiences they need for school readiness. So just to kind of think about it as you are looking at this category 3 activity, think, how can you ensure that all of the type 3 early learning centers in your network have a tier 1 curriculum within all of their classrooms? Are you aware of which sites are fully equipped of curriculum? Is there a way that you could get this total necessary, some type of needs assessment to be able to make your request? So just kind of think about the processes that you would be using to figure out what classrooms are in need. Are all of the classrooms equipped with the supports, the resources to support developmentally appropriate learning? And what steps can be taken to assess the needs of early learning centers in your network? Okay, so some of the questions, like I said, included in this category are very similar to the questions that have been included in the in Super App for supporting early childhood quality. So this question is specific to type 3 early learning centers. And unlike last year's Super App application, for this question, networks, unlike this year's Super App question, for this question, networks can request funding for curriculum for new and established classrooms. So within this year's Super App, we have reworded the question to where you are only allowed to purchase curriculum for newly established classrooms, but we don't have that stipulation within this question within Believe. So if you do have a already established classroom within a type 3 early learning center, you can purchase curriculum for that site and for that classroom. This can also include classroom libraries, digital resources, or anything to enhance the classroom's use of high quality curriculum. And just to point out, because some of the Super App funds are targeted more specifically to early literacy development, requests for math manipulatives or curriculum supports that were not directly related to literacy development were often denied. But this won't be the case within this application. So feel free to make requests for those supports as well. And then the next one, you are looking at ensuring that classrooms have developmentally appropriate resources. So within the Believes framework, the department created and linked a classroom resources checklist that I'm going to put into the chat right now. And with this checklist, it was given to assist networks in assessing the needs for sites within your networks. So Ready Start Network lead agencies from cohort 1, they may remember a similar grant opportunity that was offered to them and where they had to kind of do a needs assessment and decide what resources, what instructional resources and classroom materials are needed at each of the sites within their area. So just kind of think, looking at that learning resources materials checklist that I put in the chat. Does anyone have any ideas about how they could possibly utilize that checklist to make a request for resources or materials within their network? I'll pause for a second. How could you possibly use that checklist? And feel free to unmute or just type it in the chat box if you have a response.
I pulled it up on the screen just in case some folks weren't able to see it on their own computer, but this is what it looks like for the infant classroom, toddlers.
Leslie,
Mm-hmm.
I know as our other hat for CCR&R, often when the coaches are in the classrooms working, let's say with a toddler classroom, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say the issue is behavior, but when the coach goes in, they may see that the real issue is that they don't have enough equipment or, you know, not age appropriate equipment or supplies in the classroom. And that's what's really causing the issue. So I think this is great to be able to go in every classroom and kind of check some of these things off. And it also helps us to be able to talk to the directors about, look, these are the things that are recommended for this age group.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad that y'all are finding it helpful. And also even a newly established center, you know, using this as what should they purchase to kind of help them get established. I love, Kim, that you mentioned coaches, because that could be something that you might want to talk to, you know, connect with the coaches that are supporting some of the sites in your area to ask them, hey, what kind of resources do you think we should purchase? When looking at the centers in our area, where do you see the biggest need? Or even providing it to the coaches and having them complete this type of needs assessment with a site. Great. And like I mentioned, so whenever we did do this, the materials grant for our Ready Start networks, you don't need to do list. It can be kind of as specific or generic as you want. We want to know the centers that you want included. If you want to group the centers, that's fine. If you want to just say proposed purchases, art supplies, you know, you can group things as necessary. So feel free to do that. We want this to be able to work for you and make it an easy request, and then any more specific information would be collected whenever you submit for refund within EGMS. Okay, and the second activity has to do with our professional development. So professional development, coaching, training, all of those things to support the use of those tools that we just mentioned, because we know that curriculum will only take you so far. Teachers need to know how to use that curriculum and how to use it effectively. So the PD questions from activity 2 that are found in Believe are also pretty similar to the questions found in Super App. So one small difference is that we pulled apart the different vendor types. So you can see these are all of the curriculum vendors that are linked here. We did this so that networks would really focus in on the individual needs of sites for those specific categories, looking at curriculum, assessment, and those high quality interactions. And we'd also encourage networks to look deeper into some of those PD offerings from these vendors to see what additional opportunities for more targeted specific topics might be offered. So for example, if you already have sites that are proficiently using the curriculum, maybe they would benefit from the next level of training offered from the vendor. Maybe it's targeted to a specific content area or developmental domain, or even maybe some more specific curriculum coaching. So not necessarily only providing them with that intro to the curriculum, but something that might be more targeted. And as I mentioned earlier, we are also, to prepare and support teachers, offering PD opportunities for assessment and also for interactions. So we know that with all the updates within our gold license, it's brought on quite a few challenges for our classroom teachers. So how can you best support teachers in type 3 early learning centers so that they're able to use this assessment tool in a way that supports child's growth and development? So we know that with all of these different PD and training opportunities we've talked about, what can you do to have sites and teachers invest in these processes and take advantage of these opportunities? Will providing stipends or substitutes enable teachers to engage in these opportunities more effectively? Will maybe a self-paced learning modules, maybe purchased through some of those online platforms, such as My Teaching Strategies or My Teachstone, will that be easier for teachers to engage in? And how can you really encourage teachers to complete these modules? So what can you do also so that teachers can utilize gold in a way to make it work for them, work easier rather than harder? Maybe training them on utilizing some of those family engagement pieces, or purchasing support programs like the Hatch and the Hatch program that is linked to Teaching Strategies Gold. So with everything that I've said related to those professional development opportunities and options, did that make anyone start thinking of something really exciting that they would like to include on their application for this section? Something to really incentivize our teachers.
I will say, Leslie, that with having new teachers come on board, just in the LA4 program, which I know the funding is different when it says public schools and not, but just still wrapping my head around that and their feedback about what's going on, when they come into the classroom and maybe they taught 3rd grade or 4th or higher, and then they come in and they're teaching pre-K. TS Gold can be very scary. And so I do know that is a plus. And also with the childcare centers, when they they're just the ones that are opening, and then they're hiring teachers or assistants that they've never heard of TS Gold. So that's a big plus to let them know that, we can get someone in there that professional to help them and take them step by step, so they don't feel so afraid and overwhelmed when they, begin.
Absolutely. I see Angela said tablets for each classroom to support gold documentation. Yes, I think a lot of the parts with gold encourage you to take recordings or videos, and the use of a tablet for that specific instance does make it easier. And I wonder if even tying in that some of those PD opportunities, like, hey, if you participate in XYZ, or if you have teachers within your center participate in XYZ, we will provide a tablet to this classroom to support the use of gold. So tying in those things, like rewarding teachers for participating in the training with some of those things. Yes, this could be utilized for stipends to complete trainings during non-work hours. I know we've talked during the gold webinars about inter-rater reliability and how to get childcare teachers to complete their inter-rater reliability. And we have said, a few networks suggested that, that they themselves are pathway certified providers. So what they've been doing is creating a certificate looking to see which teachers have completed their inter-rater reliability, and then they go in, create a certificate for inter-rater reliability, sign it off, include their pathways hours, their pathways number on that certificate, and then those teachers can use them for licensing clock hours.
Hi, this is Michelle Jubert. I have a quick
Michelle.
question. I know we provide technology for our centers. Currently, they all have iPads. However, the Wi-Fi that they typically have is not very well supported by the technology that we're providing. Is there any way we can assist them with hotspots or something like that? I mean, it's just, I mean, they have the iPads, but they're not, a lot of the centers, even us, when we go into the centers, we have to use our own hotspots because we can't, I mean, they still, some of them still have dial-up, which I know that's like surprising, but we do have some. I know I'm laughing because I know you don't think dial-up, but yeah, it's very slow. So I just wanted to know if that would be an acceptable cost.
Yeah, it looks like Devin says that sounds like a great use of operating costs from category 1.
Okay. They're gonna love me.
I know we're experiencing that same thing with our daycare, one of our type 3 centers with the internet as well.
Okay, next slide. Okay, and social emotional well-being. I heard someone mention supports for this a second ago in one of the comments. So our third activity is that communities support the social and emotional well-being of children and educators by providing additional mental health resources and trauma-informed supports. So we know a child's social and emotional well-being directly impacts their overall development and learning. SEL skills can influence educational attainment, employment, and earnings as much or more than academic achievement measured by standardized tests. And if anything we've learned, the COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated these struggles and introduced new stressors and removed the comforting connections and routines in the lives of children and adults. So to reconnect children and staff and set the stage for foundational learning, SEL instruction and coaching is going to be more critical than ever. You have ideas for mental health support. So you could request funding. We know that we have been providing our sites, our childcare sites, our type 1s and type 2s, and along with them, with more supports from Tulane. So we've increased the number of supports that we provide through the TIKES program. But if you need additional supports related to social and emotional well-being for not only the children, but for also the early childhood educators within your network, additional funding can be provided to support this activity. So y'all mentioned earlier wanting to provide conscious discipline training or coaching. And previously, if you contracted directly with this vendor, it wouldn't be eligible for that CLSD funding that was mentioned earlier in Super App, mainly because it's not directly tied to early literacy. But within this application, it would be. So you could network with other vendors such as Conscious Discipline, Second Step, some of those more early childhood targeted social emotional vendors to see what is available. In addition, a lot of our curriculum companies offer trainings specific to supporting social and emotional well-being. So we know that Frog Street, that Conscious Discipline is included within the Frog Street curriculum, and Frog Street has another specific professional development opportunity within their category that uses a lot of the concepts of conscious discipline and relates it to the curriculum, and that could be purchased as well. Do you have ideas for Tulane is the only on-site support? It's the only one that we contract with for mental health consultations. Now, if you as a network would like to contract with an additional or with another agency to support, that would be something that you would do on your end. But that is the support, that is the mental health contractor that the state has established and has throughout the whole state. PD, including sending directors to Frog Street Splash Conference, paying for the registration fee. Yes, that would be included. I would make sure that they are also redelivering everything that they learned through these conferences into the classroom to make it to where their teachers could really benefit from the things that they're learning through that conference. Okay, and universal developmental screening. Y'all know that we've really been pushing for this universal developmental screening initiative, and developmental disabilities and delays can often go undetected. Oftentimes people aren't identified until once they hit those standardized tests in 3rd grade. So it's best that we get them targeted early so that children can get the necessary supports they need to be successful in early elementary. So a universal screening of all children can lead to long-term achievement. When developmental and learning needs are identified early and accurately, and when children receive timely, appropriate, effective supports, interventions, and specialized services aligned to their needs, learning is accelerated, skill gaps are closed, and children achieve at higher levels. So to build a universal developmental screening process that improves child outcomes, early childhood community networks will create a consistent screening and referral process that monitors learning and development to improve outcomes for children. I got a question about center personnel for Frog Street. What about public school teachers? Remember that this funding within the Believe application is targeted towards type 3 early learning centers. If you wanted to do Frog Street trainings for school-based teachers, you could request that by going through Super App and request CLSD funding. So think CLSD funding, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the questions are the same. These questions within the Believe application or for early childhood type 3 early learning centers. But if you wanted to get the same type of professional development opportunities for those pre-K teachers, then you would do that request through Super App. Does that, okay, good. So included on this side, I have included some of the available purchase opportunities that are for ASQ. So currently right now, the Supporting Early Learning and Literacy Guide that was recently released, ASQ or Brooks Publishing is included within that guide. And there are several options to implement ASQ screenings within your network. So they have starter kits for ASQ. We've mentioned in the previous slide that social emotional learning. There's also the ASQ screener for social emotional learning. So that is also available, as well as activities to support ASQ, the developmental screener, and activities support that social and emotional learning screener as well. So if you go to that guide, all of the possible options for purchase are available. And just to reflect on some of the things we talked about for activity 4, how can your network expand upon their current developmental screening processes? So we have talked to quite a few of our networks during the Developmental Screening Initiative network calls, and we're hearing about all of the amazing things that are going on and what everyone's doing. So think about how can you use this funding to expand upon those things. So we've heard some people talk about screening fairs or weekends where families can bring their children in there to get screened. So how can you use this funding to support some of those initiatives? Does your network have an ASQ trainer who attended that 2-day Train the Trainer event that was offered virtually through the department? People have reached out asking us if we're going to do that again, and the answer is no, not at this time. However, with the funding that's provided within this activity for category 3, you could utilize some of this funding to work with the vendor directly, to work with Brooks Publishing, and get a train the trainer created in your network. We are, however, looking at providing training opportunities where we would train people to administer the assessment, but this would not make people train the trainer certified, but they would be able to administer the assessment, but they wouldn't be able to administer the trainings. That makes sense. But we are talking about that, providing that virtually to interesting networks. And then another thing to think about is what materials, trainings, or resources would allow your centers to institute a universal screening process. Do you have screening kits? Do you need teachers to be trained? What would be the best process for that to occur? Would it be better, instead of training teachers, to contract with others that could come into the center and train them, or develop a process to connect to doctors' offices to see about gathering some of the developmental screening results that were maybe submitted or performed by that local pediatrician? And category 3, activity 5. So activity 5 is looking at supporting our young children with disabilities. So communities provide high quality, direct, and related support for young children with IEPs to increase inclusive opportunities within the least restrictive environment. So all young children with disabilities should have access to inclusive, high quality early childhood programs where they are provided with individualized and appropriate support in meeting high expectations. So professional development supports teachers in creating inclusive learning environments that use child-led, evidence-based, and data-driven instruction. Classroom routines and activities become more accessible through providing resources and/or adaptive materials or equipment. And this proactive approach allows children to participate fully as possible, builds upon children's strengths, increases confidence, and promotes independence. So last year was the first year that we made this available through Super App. Through Super App, we had a question, and we have that same question again this year, where networks, early childhood networks, can identify the partners that they would like to, the vendors that they would like to partner with in the Partnerships for Success Guide to enhance the, to build upon and provide professional development for specialized supports within their network. So the Partnerships for Success Guide, the department has categorized areas of specialized support that are frequently required to address the unique needs of children with disabilities. Professional development may encompass more than one of each of these specialized areas. So we've got communication supports, assistive technology, functional skills, sensory environment, and executive functioning and self-regulation. We also have little call-out boxes that show you which vendors specifically are targeted towards early childhood. So I know quite a bit of our networks have worked with vendors through that are found in the Partnerships for Success Guide. Some of our networks that were in our inclusion pilot more specifically. So if anyone wants to share out anything that they found helpful with working with these vendors, feel free to take yourself off of mute or type it in the chat. Mary, I know that y'all worked with Lessard, and I think you even presented, helped Britt present about their work in the inclusion pilot during Teacher Leader Summit. Is there anything you wanted to share out about working with them?
We did. It was an amazing, amazing experience. We actually were able to have them visit we went through like a cycle. So like they would have like a pre-conference with the teacher via email. and ask her about specific students and what their challenges were and things like that. And then we would go into the classroom and we kind of shadowed them so that we would learn how to kind of go through this process as well. They would go into the classroom and observe, and we would have, all along the way, they would give professional development on different kinds of supports for children, like visuals and all different kinds of things. And so then the observer would be looking for them implementing that in the classroom, and how that any of the strategies that they had been taught could be used to help with any of the children they were having difficulties with. And then she would give the teacher overall feedback, just kind of in general, but then specific feedback about the child that the teacher had identified. And so the bulleted items that you have on your screen there, those were the topics of the different PD sessions that we had over the course of a year. And it was so good that we've contracted with them again to target one of our low performing schools that has a lot of new teachers going through alternative certification. And we're going to kind of do this process again with them. It was an amazing experience, and I would highly recommend it to anyone.
And I think I'm sorry, go on.
That's okay. It was useful for not just our special ed teachers, but our regular ed teachers, and not just for our SPED kids, but for all of our children. Because many of our children who may not have an identified disability still needed those extra supports. And so we were able to generalize and transfer that learning to all of our students.
That's great. And then I think that you could probably work with them. With this being a different setting, you might need a more specific type of contract with whichever entity you decide to go with. But I'm pretty sure that the vendors within that guide could make it very targeted for the one that you're working with. So if you say, hey, we've got X number of centers, and so it's going to look a lot different than what they provided to their school-based pre-K special education programs, but they probably could create something more targeted to address whatever needs you have for that specific group. Yeah, it's going to be a different set. You're going to be wanting to accomplish something different. So yes, that is great. Okay, so just kind of to reflect upon that, how can teachers in your network be supported in the care and education of young children with disabilities? And how can early learning centers create more accessible learning environments through the use of adaptive materials, such as augmentative communication devices, communication boards, weighted stuffed animals or blankets, and sensory toys? And I'm not seeing, but there is a question within the Believe application that actually calls out that, where we're asking you what adaptive resources or materials would you like to purchase to enhance the learning and development of young children with disabilities in the classroom. So whether it's a sensory room or a sensory area or anything that you would need to see what was out there. It might require you to kind of maybe connect with an OT or a PT within the schools to see what's out, what is available, where you could look, what resources or examples they may be wanting to provide you, but that could also be a good use of this funding. And if you have need any support with the questions within category 3, you can reach out to myself, leslie.doyle@la.gov, or Charlene Long at charlene.long@la.gov with any of the questions within this section. And I will pass it over to Amanda Colin on our team to tell us a little bit about empowering our families.
Hey everyone, I'm super glad to be talking about empowering families in category 4. So real quick, I'll go over the different activities for category 4 and where we're going for this. So the department is prioritizing empowering families to access the tools and resources to support children's development. There are going to be 3 different activities that we're going to be looking at today. Activity 1 is that communities will use strategies to support child development through at-home learning and family engagement programs. And these 2 are both huge in itself, at-home learning and family engagement programs. Activity 2 is communities will link families with supports for monitoring their children's development and provide coordinated support services to better prepare children for future success. And this does support what Leslie and Charlene's work with developmental screening process. Here's where we'll really talk about connecting directly to families and supporting families with the developmental information they need to learn about milestones, the importance of monitoring their child's development, and how to connect them to the coordinated support services within their community. And activity 3 is communities can develop plans and partnerships with families, school systems, and program partners to support early childhood transitions. So this is something that we have talked about before and have some previous guidance on as well, but we'll talk about some very specific vendors who can also help provide some support here. So we already know that families make choices every day that affect a child's development and their learning. These choices are rooted in their own personal belief systems and cultural identities. It's important that we want to understand their perspectives of every family and seeing them as experts to help create the best care and learning environment for their child. Families have such unique strengths. They can share their children's school experiences, their routines for preparing for schools and sites, childcares. They share what family relationships are in the background, and they can talk about and share information about peer contacts outside of education. They provide a window into what a parent's perception is about their own role in supporting education, learning at home, transitions, what they know about developmental milestones as well, and supporting educational activities. Families are the most important constant in a child's life. They are everything to that child. So we really want to ensure that we have that partnership with families so that we can engage with them. That engagement, family engagement is, I think about what Devin and Michael Bach said earlier about data. There are short-term wins and long-term goals. Well, family engagement is absolutely the long game. You may have a few short-term wins along the way, but it's the long game. It's the journey when it comes to family engagement. It doesn't mean that we don't celebrate the little small wins along the way, but we have to recognize when it comes to family engagement, we're changing a story and a narrative, what that looks like, and creating relationships. And those don't happen overnight. They have to be deliberate and they have to be systematic. And we want to influence families to be a part of and own their child's education. The more that we can establish these relationships with families, the more then that we can generate more engagement, an increased impact on families, and with higher quality results. And we know that research shows it improves teacher satisfaction with higher family engagement, more positive school climate, and overall performance for early learning sites in schools whenever we have that engagement. So with this reflection right here, I would just ask you to think about what it is the ideal scenario is that you would like to see when you think about families engaged in their child's learning and development. What would it look like for every program partner, or what would you hope it would look like in that community network? If you want to type it in the chat box, maybe you could put it And in a couple of phrases, what would it look like? My hope would be that families are communicating with the teachers frequently, that they have an opportunity to learn about what their child is learning every day in the schools. The second question is, which stakeholders do you think could be involved and should be involved in the conversations about the planning for family engagement? And right now I think about families, moms, dads, adoptive parents, foster parents, aunts, uncles, grandmothers, definitely fathers, single parents. I also know for certain your educators would want to be involved, stakeholders who are organizations who purposefully and intentionally plan to support children and families that are in the community, cards, Families Helping Families. And then I'd like you to think about moving forward, what conversations you'll be having with your program partners about how to approach family engagement. And I imagine they might have some concerns. Are they already thinking about it? Are they excited about what it could possibly look like? I know that we just entered and released the Being Engaged Birth to 12 framework. I just dropped the link in the chat box. By doing that, I've reached out to some providers, and they have expressed feelings of overwhelmness. That framework is very comprehensive. It is an adoption or an adaptation of the Head Start, and it could seem overwhelming, but right now is the time to be thinking about how we can engage families in such a meaningful and intentional way with our program partners. Next slide. So, excuse me, the first activity is supporting the learning at home. So community networks can be thinking about supporting learning at home through a variety of different research-based family engagement strategies. You can be able to support families using available programs, materials, and resources. So some examples of, and Joyce Epstein's research, there are 6 really strong strategies to bolster family engagement. There are family workshops. These family education workshops are very strategic and well-planned. They can be about learning strategies, or they could be about parenting. These particular workshops are for the benefit of the family, and they could be about teaming up with the teacher in any type of way, or any kind of I guess module, or any way that you feel comfortable to share, and you can buy curriculum to support these kind of workshops as well. I'm also utilizing innovative communication methods. The most preferred is a 2-way style of communicating. That would include that families have an opportunity to go back and forth with the community network, or whether or not it's interpersonal, but face-to-face is always certainly the most popular and the most effective of the 2-way. There is a place for 1-way communication styles, but 2-way does happen to have an opportunity for the input from families. Resource fairs are a resource center is another very strong research-based strategy, provides families an opportunity to go to one location and get connections to community resources, and then additional strategies. It's like a fair of sorts, so that they can access all types of resources. Learning at home programs, and these are whether or not you have subscriptions, things like Seesaw, not necessarily just Remind isn't one type of communication method, but a learning at home program could be raising readers, some other type of subscription that you might want to share with families so that they can participate, fast talk. Also, there are community learning and collaboration opportunities. These are whenever you branch out and reach out to the library, Families Helping Families, whenever they have an opportunity to co-collaborate on an opportunity for families. And then also providing leadership and advocacy opportunities for families. This is where they have opportunity to to sit on a council or a committee and provide feedback on a topic that is important for their child. This is a great opportunity for them to be a part of the committee for the developmental screening planning, or be a part of a workshop or focus group to provide feedback on transition activities that could be beneficial for a program that you're building. That way they feel their voice is being heard, and it's important that they know that their voice is valued and you're taking their input and utilizing it. Next slide. So the next slide will show you some vendors as well as strategies that could support these. And just for the sake of time, I won't go through each one of them in detail, but Lena Start is a wonderful family education workshop. Is a great example of that family education workshop strategy, and you would be able to request money to support this. It's a great opportunity. We already have a couple of networks implementing Lena Start, St. Landry, as well as Iberville. Ready Rosie, a lot of you guys are already utilizing Ready Rosie, so some of your funding could certainly continue the Ready Rosie, as well as Fast Talk, which is a tool that builds partnerships with teachers and families, and it does certainly support early literacy and language development. All right, on the next slide, we'll talk about activity 2, which is coordinating child developmental supports for families. Here's where we want to talk about families being directly linked to community supports to monitor their child's development and receive these coordinated support services. Here's where, whereas Leslie and Charlene's is building that infrastructure and ensuring that there is that coordination is happening there. This is where you're directly, I guess, interfacing with families, right? Ensuring that families have an opportunity to learn about developmental milestones, to access and know about possible screening clinics that you have every month, or that you're connecting them to these screening clinics, that you're publicizing or providing the information about the screening clinics, or you're providing brochures about developmental milestones and how to learn more about it. Or maybe you're doing a family workshop on pairing the family workshop with developmental milestones. Here's where you're putting these two together and sharing that information with families to grow their knowledge about how to support their child's developmental support as well.
Amanda, I would also add that because the developmental screening process is more at that community-based level, there's not funding in category 3 for networks that do not have childcare sites. So if networks that don't have childcare sites, if you're one of those networks that didn't receive funding in category 3, however, you do want to utilize funding for enhancing your developmental screening initiative and building upon that universal screening process, you can request funds within category 4 to do so at more of that community-based level.
Thank you, Leslie. And also note that the last bullet and the bullet right above, this is where we want to let families know what to do for the next step if they do have concerns. If the doctor does, a pediatrician shares that information with families, where would families go? And I think that's where that co-branded materials comes in with that you guys have already created. On the next slide, I can show you some examples and to talk a little bit, or we'll have a reflection real quick. At the very bottom, you'll see the network resource finder. That's a link to those co-branded materials. And you'll see that every network has these co-branded materials available to them. Before Britt's adventure, she was able to put together this wonderful little map, and all the Learn to Science Act early materials are co-branded with your logo, your child find information or child search information, and you have all that available. And by saturating your community with this information is such a benefit to families for them. All right, we can go back to the reflection. Perfect. So I'd love for you to think about and talk with your community partners about what steps you can take to support families to learn about screening opportunities. about developmental milestones and what the referral and evaluation process will look like. So families have that information and know how to act on that information. What stakeholders will be included in those conversations when you're planning the family support? I behoove you to include families in that so that you have firsthand knowledge from families of what they don't know so that you can correct what it is and find out where the gaps are of what families don't know, what's missing, and make moves to correct those. Also, think about what existing organizations already support families in your community. And we kind of talked a little bit about those: pediatricians, Family Helping Families, and the Center for Autism and Related Disorder cards. All right, on the next slide, I'm trying to get through all of these. So activity 2 is coordinate child developmental support for families. And here's some sample activities. You'll see that we talked about the family education workshop. That's where you're providing a space for adults and families to kind of collaborate and support a child's learning and success. So I'm going to mention that 2 different companies, the Flamboyant Foundation and West Ed. Both provide a professional development on a particular strategy called academic parent-teacher teams. This particular structure is really fantastic to provide like this team approach between parents and families. Families and teachers coming together, and it kind of marks the beginning of a foundational relationship. They come together, they look at results from maybe the ASQ or whatever developmental screening tool you're using, preferably ASQ because it is the a parent engaged tool, where it's primarily taking the parents' information. You utilize that information, they come together, they make a plan together, and the teachers model activities for the families to practice and then take home. You take this APTT and you do this at the beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year. And then families are pulled in throughout the year to get to see and monitor their child's progress. It's a wonderful, wonderful strategy. It can be adapted to look for early childhood as well as K-12, but it's a wonderful opportunity. I'd also say that the Flamboyant Foundation has really great professional development for family engagement topics. Also, just a reminder, the public awareness campaign for the Learn the Signs Act Early. Also, the Watch Me Thrive, Celebrating Milestones is a lot of really great resources. I've linked a training for providers here as well. On the next slide, we'll just kind of briefly talk about the supporting early childhood transitions. And we've talked about this before, I believe, earlier this year. There's 2 different ways or 2 different approaches. And you can kind of diversify both of these approaches really to meet the needs of your network's resources, as well as the needs of the families within your community. So a summer transition program where you're really just putting a lot of intensive focus on summer activities or late spring summer activities for transitions, or you can do a series of events that support transitions, maybe starting mid-spring and then moving into summer. But however you decide to design your early childhood transition program, just know that the key is to ensure that these transition events provide experiences for the family and the child. This transition into pre-K or into kindergarten is can be very rough for not just the child, but for the family as well. We want to support both of them into this transition process. By providing calendars and multiple variety of different events, through multiple modalities, it does support your families in a variety of different ways. Next slide. Some really great examples of how to do this is Raising a Reader. It's a nonprofit organization, and we'll talk a little bit about them as well as a great opportunity to support early literacy. But Raising a Reader has really great transition activities as well. And it's really motivated by the child, but it also helps the families understand a lot about reading to your child, the benefits of it, and then so they get a lot of strategies themselves. Also is Training Grounds. This particular organization is founded in New Orleans, and Melanie, who is one of the owners there, is created a lot of different transitional activities. The We Play Gets Ready for School is one very targeted opportunity for that transition. It's activities that are very, very specific to pairing the child and the parent together, and it's led by a facilitator. So this is a program already designed for transitions. So I do think that if you could reach out to and just look at the website, learn about what other opportunities they provide, I think you would be interested in what Training Ground has to offer. Go ahead. This is what your example questions will look like in the category 4. So basically you have your activity, and then you'll have some resources to use and help you think through what your where you may go. And I know that, you know, with family engagement, it's a little different as we're really kind of digging into family engagement. Some of you guys are Head Start grantees and have been doing family engagement for years. Some of you have been doing the work of Title I for a long time. So you're at multiple, you know, variety of different levels when it comes to family engagement. So I wanted to provide as much information as possible to help with this process. So you just provide your vendor, what type of description and plans and additional proposed expenditures. We know that family engagement events are just a little bit different than a typical event. So be sure to include what other expenditures you might need and the projected cost amount. Go ahead. All right, a real quick reflection here. Think about what preparations you can start in the fall, are what your program will look like for an equitable transition experience. We certainly want all of our kiddos in the Early Childhood Network to have an experience, transition experiences for all of our kids, not just in one program versus a different program. Also, you might think about how you can streamline transition procedures for families or processes for families to assist them in supporting their child's transition into kindergarten. All right, if you have other questions about family engagement and requesting for the Believe application regarding anything to do with family engagement, please reach out to myself. I'm happy to talk further about it. This is certainly one of my favorite topics. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. All right, so rounding us out, we're almost done. The Believe application, what we shared with you this morning, is a template in Word document divided into those 4 categories, but we plan to release a JOT form later this year that will be used for submission. So when that is released, we will let you know. But in the meantime, as you're determining what you'll apply for, you can be working in that Word document template. Similarly to all other funding opportunities, please present this opportunity to your program partners to solicit feedback. There will be a question on the application asking you to describe what those opportunities for feedback were and including dates and events in which you solicited that feedback. The timeline is we release the application today. We have collaboratives today and tomorrow. We will have Believe Q&A sessions at the conclusion of weekly office hours for lead agencies next week and November 30th after Thanksgiving. So bring your questions about Believe to those office hour opportunities. Later this year, before Christmas holidays, hopefully we will release the JOT form in which you can submit your Believe requests. And finally, these submissions are due February 4th, 2022. Here's the contact information for all 4 categories. If you have any general questions about Believe or Super App, you can contact me at lizziekose@la.gov. But if you have a specific question about a category, please feel free to contact any one of these folks. And next steps, read through the planning template, review what you're eligible to apply for in each category, and think about who needs to be involved in these decisions, how you'll include them, how you'll hear provider feedback, and what you want to do to engage them. Consider what data you have or need in order to make data-driven decisions. So all of the things that we talked about earlier today with Michael Bach and Devin and Sydney's presentation, how can that be applicable to this application process? How can you use your data kits to help make some informed decisions here? We will have Q&A sessions after weekly webinars on November 16th and 30th, and you can contact us with any questions you might have. This concludes our session for the Fall Collaborative. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us. A reminder, we will not have office hours tomorrow, so hope you all have a great week. Please reach out if you need anything, and thanks again for joining.